glorious geeks! For those of you new here, I am so happy to have you. Oh My World is a mission-based media brand where we break down complicated world issues in an easy and fun way and why they matter to you. I do a lot of impressions of world leaders, which means I'm often dressed up like a man with weird hair and bud accent. The mission behind Oh My World is to raise awareness of global developments, and especially the horrific activities of dictators and human rights abusers, while lifting up those doing good around the world. Because through awareness, we can fundamentally change the world for the better. So thank you for being a geek, because just by watching and subscribing, you are fighting for a better place. I'm gonna do something different than the usual format, and instead of giving love to all the world events this week, we're gonna focus on the Russia-Ukraine war, because there's just too much to discuss. But before we start, please hit that subscribe button below, click the notification bell, and like this video. We got a lot to cover, so let's start by catching you up on the latest in Ukraine. Then we'll share the perspective from the ground with my brave friend, Misha Zelensky, who's in Ukraine right now. And then we'll talk about Putin's mental state with my amazing friend and former double agent, Naveed Jamali. Russia has escalated its war in Ukraine and has increased its aggression against the Ukrainian people. It's estimated that nearly 100,000 Russian troops might be inside Ukraine right now, and their goal is to take control over major Ukrainian cities, but they've struggled in their fight to do it. Ukraine's President Zelensky has been fighting alongside regular Ukrainian citizens. In fact, when he was offered a way out of Ukraine, he said, "I need ammunition, not a ride." About 1 million Ukrainians have fled as refugees so far, and millions of others are sheltering in subways and basements and parking garages. Russia has stepped up its attacks through a combination of ground troops and missile strikes. They've struck residential areas and also some major buildings, like one governmental one and a TV and radio tower, which forced TV stations off the air. Russia's trying to capture Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and satellite imagery shows a convoy of Russian military tanks and other vehicles 40 miles long headed into the capital. So the US, Europe, and many other partners around the world have been rolling out their responses. They've imposed really tough sanctions, like preventing the Russian central bank from accessing its foreign reserves abroad. That's strong. Imagine if our own Federal Reserve Bank had money in another currency abroad, and that country said, nope, you can't touch your money that's sitting here. And then Russian oligarchs have been targeted. These are the uber-wealthy Russian businessmen who prop up President Putin and his regime and who made their money off of corruption. Europe partnered with us in these sanctions, and then the most amazing thing happened, where you saw the rest of the world unite in its collective desire to pressure the Russian government. Companies like BP and Shell dumped their billion-dollar stakes from a major Russian energy company, and bars dumped Russian vodka, refusing to sell it. Even FIFA kicked Russia out of the World Cup qualifying games after facing pressure from other soccer teams. And at the UN, where countries excel at being feckless, even there, 141 of them voted to pass a resolution condemning Russia's invasion. Most importantly, the US and Europe further beefed up their military aid to Ukraine, so the US will be sending an additional $350 million in assistance to support Ukraine's frontline defenders. But Ukraine is fighting one of the strongest militaries in the world, and so they're gonna need even stronger weapons and missiles than we've provided so far. While this has been going on, Ukrainian and Russian delegations have been meeting, and they just agreed to hold a ceasefire to allow for safe corridors so that civilians can safely leave. I don't know where or how this ends, but I can tell you from experience that unfortunately, these things don't usually end as quickly as they started. The thing I think Putin underestimated was how strong and impressive the resistance from Ukrainians would be. And he also clearly didn't expect how tough the sanctions would be and how united the world would be in its condemnation. Even inside Russia, there are no voices publicly supporting President Putin. Actually, thousands of Russians have been protesting against this war, and Russian independent press have refused to parrot the Russian government propaganda. Putin made a gross miscalculation, and that'll bite him in the ass later. But even if Ukraine loses the battle, their resistance proves to Putin that they're not going anywhere and they're not going to ever give in. My friend, and apparently Oh My World Ukraine correspondent, Misha Zelensky, is on the ground reporting for an Australian outlet called Financial Review. He was on the show last week reporting from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and has since moved to a city called Lviv, closer to the Polish border. And a couple nights ago, he posted this kind of chilling clip.
Okay, probably time to get inside here just before curfew. The sirens are going off in Lviv. The streets are empty, as you can see. So I'm in the main square here at Lviv, just heading back to my Airbnb now. Sure, it's fine. Peace and love. Talk to you guys soon.
Misha also shared with us his latest observations.
G'day Hagar and all the Oh My World fans out there. I'm coming to you from the middle of Lviv, which is in Ukraine, 75 kilometers from the Polish border. So Lviv is the center of a humanitarian crisis. A refugee crisis has formed in this town as 800,000 Ukrainians have already fled the border into Poland, into Hungary, into Romania, into Slovakia. Millions of other Ukrainians have been displaced as the Russians have invaded the country from the north, the south, and the east. So cities like Kharkiv, like Kyiv, like Kharkov have been emptied out by people as they try to get away from Russian troops and Russian aggression. Now, a lot of bad things happening in the world, clearly, a lot of bad things happening in Ukraine. I thought I might share two quick stories with you that might give you some sense that humanity is not all done for. So a lot of the restaurants are shut in Lviv. It's still running reasonably normally, but as you get further and further out from the center, more things are closed. Now, I went into a local Ukrainian restaurant. A woman there called Lanya, she was feeding me borscht like my grandmother makes. My family is Russian-Ukrainian, although I'm Australian. And so I was eating the food and I was talking to her. I said, look, are you guys making any money? She said, well, no, we're not doing this for money. So the city and the country have forgiven all taxes, all rents. So she said, we're literally doing this to keep people fed. So the money you're spending eating here is going into feeding people that are refugees, feeding people that are fighting the war effort, that are trying to keep the country going. So there are pockets of goodness in the world, as bad as things are right now in Ukraine. Now, another story is I was eating dinner in another restaurant, in a fish shop, and I ran across 3 Indian people who told me they just got out of Kyiv and were swapping stories about getting out of Kyiv. They said to me that they got looked after by a number of Ukrainian families. And so when they were getting pulled out, they work for a tech company. When they were getting pulled out by their tech company, the tech company also took out them and their families. So the 3 Indians were extracted, but so were the Ukrainian family that was so generous to them. They said to us, we love Ukrainians. They are brilliant people. They're so generous. And they paid tribute to all the families and all the soldiers. So there's a couple of stories for you all. Stay safe. Love you all. Talk soon.
If you want to see more of Misha's work, follow him on Twitter and Instagram, where he shares his articles, which are beautifully written because he has a way of describing and humanizing things in a way that makes you feel like you're there. Stay safe, Misha. Is President Putin losing his mind? This is a serious question, because there are reports from people close to him saying he's acting different than usual, that he's paranoid and erratic and easily angry. It's okay, it's not like Russia has nuclear weapons or anything. The US intelligence community has now prioritized assessing Putin's mental state, since it plays a huge role in how bad he lashes out in response to our moves, and in figuring out how to end this thing. Putin has always been evil, but he now seems unstable, and it all really started to come out in a crazy-ass speech he delivered last week, where he tried to justify his invasion and seemed to believe his own lie. He said, for example, that Ukraine was committing genocide against Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. No, not true. And that now Ukraine was secretly being run by the West, proven by the protests that broke out in 2014 against Ukraine's pro-Russia leader back then. No, that was the will of the Ukrainian people. He stressed that Russia needed to denazify Ukraine. Weird, since President Zelensky is Jewish and actually the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. In general, Putin was more mad in this speech than he normally acts. He said that it was like Ukraine was holding a knife to Russia's throat. And he compared the US invasion of Iraq to his own security concerns and asked, why couldn't he invade Ukraine? Not the same, but let's not talk about the Iraq invasion right now. His theme was that Russia's the victim, and he said, why did you have to make an enemy of us? Don't you dare feel bad. He's a manipulative and criminal bitch. Whatever analysis we want to make on Putin's speech, it's clear that his mental and emotional state is something that's going to have to be managed. And that matters when you're the US, Europe, and NATO, and you're crafting your responses to Putin's invasion, because you don't want him going insane and launching a nuclear weapon. I asked you all if you thought he could be walked back from all this, or if you thought he might just end up doubling down, and 85% of you said he would likely double down. So to help answer this question, I spoke to my super cool friend Naveed Jamali, who was a former double agent for the FBI and the Russian GRU, which is a Soviet military intelligence organization. Naveed knows the Russian government psyche because it was his job to know their psyche. He's now the editor-at-large at Newsweek, and if you want to hear more about his incredible story, he wrote an amazing book called How to Catch a Russian Spy, the true story of an American civilian turned double agent. Hey, Naveed, thank you so much for joining me. I am so lucky to have you on Oh My World.
Oh my God, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, we're the lucky ones. So tell us about dictator psychology. It plays a big role here. We're all trying to figure out, will Putin back down? Can we walk him back and get into a deal? Or will he double down? How do dictators think in a situation like this?
Well, listen, I mean, dictators don't retire to Boca, right? Like that's not a thing for them. So you have to think about what is Putin's end game here. And He's been in office for 22 years. He just turned 70. Clearly, this is not a rational action in the sense that it's what's right for Russia, right? So it's a vanity project. I really don't think that this is so much that he's crazy, but I think that he has this vision of himself as this like new czar, and he wants to have this legacy of like dominating Ukraine. So if you're going to think about what does that mean for an off ramp, like how do you deal with that? You're going to have to give Putin some way out of this. There's got to be some symbolic victory. You're right. If you keep pushing him, and I think Biden's done a really good job of this, if you keep pushing him, he's going to double and triple and quadruple down. He's just going to keep going and making it worse and worse and worse. So what is the end game? I think for him, it's going to be, the sort of Bush moment where he's going to seize Kyiv and be able to say, well, mission accomplished, victory is here. And even though we all know that the seizing of Kyiv doesn't mean that he's achieved a strategic goal of taking over Ukraine. And that's kind of what I think we're talking about here, is that you got to deal with just this egomaniac who's got this vanity project. You got to give him something for him to go away.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. We're now witnessing in Ukraine how aggressive and criminal the Russian government and military can be. But as the US and Europe think of options to push back on Russia, we have to be aware of just how ugly the Russians fight. So I want to highlight for you a private Russian paramilitary force called the Wagner Group. This is basically a group of private military contractors that are tied to the Russian government, though the Russian government denies any ties. They were sanctioned by the US government a few years ago for fighting in eastern Ukraine, but their activities in some countries shed light into just how bad their war crimes can be. Some governments or militias invite these Russian mercenaries into their country to help them fight. And these mercenaries end up inflicting unspeakable and horrific human rights abuses against the local population, while spreading Russian influence and plundering the country's natural resources. An organization I adore called the Sentry worked with CNN to investigate what the Wagner Group was doing in the Central African Republic. And they published a report last year on their findings, which detailed a range of mass atrocities like torture, burning villages, executions, targeted killings, mass shootings, forced disappearances, and rape. The UN also confirmed this behavior and details of these human rights abuses. And meanwhile, Russia continues to sit on the UN Human Rights Council. You know how I feel about the UN Human Rights Council, so we'll talk about that stupidity another time. The Wagner Group's murderous thugs are also deployed to other countries like Libya, Syria, Sudan, and Mali, where they've intentionally killed civilians and prisoners. They've looted and they've mined and booby-trapped civilian areas. And now there are reports that some units of this force are in Ukraine with orders to assassinate Ukrainian President Zelensky. Because this is a private paramilitary group, these guys live in the shadows and face zero accountability, which only further fuels their war crimes. Because of this, both the Wagner Group and obviously the Russian government are on my list this week. I know you geeks don't like to sit on your hands, and so my researcher rounded up some amazing organizations helping Ukrainians right now if you want to donate or help in other ways. World Central Kitchen is at the Ukraine-Poland border right now, providing warm meals for those who are hungry there. In fact, Chef Jose Andres is there personally handing food out. The Global Empowerment Mission is in Poland, helping refugees buy train and plane tickets to help them reach friends and family that they could stay with in Europe. The Global Giving Ukraine Crisis Relief Fund is working to help the most vulnerable people and children get access to food, medical services, and psychosocial support. And Razom for Ukraine, which is a pro-democracy and civil society organization, has prepared a list of awesome ways we can help, including things like directly helping Ukraine's military and independent press. If you're interested in some other charities, the International Red Cross, International Rescue Committee, and Save the Children are also all working to help Ukrainian refugees and others in need. Please consider giving donation or lending a helping hand, and I guarantee it'll make a difference. Oh my world, it's too much this week. But whatever I feel, I can't even begin to put myself in the shoes of a Ukrainian citizen right now. So I'm praying for Ukraine and hoping things calm down. Before you go, make sure to like this video, click the subscribe button and the notification bell. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and TikTok for political satire during happier times. And finally, if there's anything in particular you want me to talk about, reach out to me on social media and I will of course give you a shout out. Stay fabulous, geeks.